Hey everybody, and welcome to Bits of Board, where we're talking board games, miniatures, cards, and dice. My name's Michael, and today we're checking out a game by the name of Root. Now, for those of you who might have been living deep in the forest for the last couple of months, Root is one of the latest releases from Leader Games, publisher and developer of one of my favorite games out there, Vast the Crystal Caverns, and I've actually done a review for that one previously. Unlike that game, this one is a bit more of an area control resource management war game kind of thing, if you will, and it has players taking on the role of 1 to 4 different woodland creatures who call the forest their home. Now, I didn't actually pick this one up at Kickstarter. I saw it come up and I was pretty impressed by it, but Vast was still hitting the nail on the head for me, so I thought I'd leave it for the time being, but I pledged to pick it up at retail. And here I am kind of making good on that promise. Now, for me, there was a lot of build-up towards getting this one because this thing absolutely exploded all over BGG when it was released, and for good reason. There were a lot of rave reviews really praising its gameplay, a lot of hype on this one. So by the time I got it to the table, I was a little worried that the game wouldn't be able to live up to the expectations. Now, during the Kickstarter, I hadn't actually heard of designer Cole Worley. I know, shame on me, right? But I've done my research now. I've gotten a hold of a couple of his games. John Company is now in heavy rotation. What a beast of a game that is. And Pax Pamir, the second edition from that Kickstarter, is on its way. This guy has been a part of so many special games that can lightning strike a fourth or fifth time? Is this one going to hit home? And honestly, that's what this video is all about. Basically, I'm going to be running through all the major cogs that help this game turn. That's the broad overview, and then we'll take a look at each of the factions individually so you can see what they're all about, why they make this game special, and so you can pick your favorite for when you inevitably get this game to the table. Alright, you ready? I'm ready. Let's get into it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the world of Root. Now, aside from the beautiful artwork here, this board adorns the battlefield on which all of these factions are going to be facing off. We have the Marquis de Cat, the forefront military force of the forest. They've taken control of the original ruler, the Eyrie dynasties. Then there's the Woodland Alliance, which is a broad name given to the lesser inhabitants of the forest. Foxes, mice, rabbits have all banded together to take back their natural home. And lastly, we have the Vagabond, a lone warrior who wanders the forest seeking glory, looking to secure his place in the new world growing around him. Now, as I like to do with these kinds of board games, I'm going to tackle the explanation of this thing in a few steps. Firstly, I want to talk to you about the world, the map on which this game is fought. Then we'll talk about generic player goals and some of the actions available to everybody in this game. But then we'll talk about each of the 4 factions individually, because this is a fully asymmetric game. Each woodland power has their own way of playing, even their own order of doing things. It's almost as though you have 4 different games taking place on this board in front. The alternative, of course, is me actually just playing through a game and you having to put the pieces together yourself, but I really think this game is deserving of an up-close and personal look at the characters that it brings to the table, because this is going to be something else. We'll begin with the board, we'll begin with the forest. Let's do it. Now, the forest here gives us a lot of information that we need to play the game. It shows us we have clearings. We have paths connecting those clearings. And in between paths, we have forests. Now, the clearings themselves, these house the vast majority of gameplay. Not only do they hold the player's warriors, but they also have placement locations for the different structures that the players can build. Not all clearings have all of their building spaces unlocked at the beginning of the game. Some are covered by these ruin tokens, which the Vagabond will need to explore to open up for the rest of the players. Each clearing also has a suit branded against it. Here we have the rabbits, the foxes,
and the mice.
Now, it's important for players to keep track of which suited clearings they control, because having control over specific clearings will allow you to use cards, use powers, and in some cases actually win you the game.
Connecting these clearings, we have paths, which players may utilize to move their warriors, although there are a couple of rules that you've got to remember when moving. Now, in between all of the clearings and all of the roads, we have forest regions. And these, well, they don't mean too much to the majority of players at the table. In fact, it's only the vagabond who cares about these, because he is able to slip into the forests to quickly and easily move around the board, making him one of the most mobile factions around. It is also worth pointing out at this point that there is a river that runs through the board, and while we're not going to be making use of it at all in this video, the expansion faction, the Riverfolk Company, make use of it a lot. Now, separate to the map itself, there are a couple of other landmarks that you should be aware of. Down the very bottom, we have the victory points tracker, and up the top, we have the current stock of craftable items. If a player wants to craft an item, they have to first make sure that the token is available. Now, of course, that's beyond the scope of this little segment. Before we get to that, let's firstly take a look at the overall goals of this game. Now, as I alluded to just then, this is a victory points game, and the first player to hit 30 victory points is the winner. Victory points are awarded a number of ways. You can place buildings, you can craft items, or you can accomplish one of your many faction-specific goals. And while it's safe to say that some methods will grant more victory points than others, you really shouldn't ignore any of the different paths. Now, there are other ways that players can actually take home the crown here. Inside the deck, we have a number of dominance cards, which at a certain point in the game will allow a player who has taken control of certain clearings across the map to take victory immediately. Now, you might have noticed, having a quick look at the cards, that they themselves have a suit representation the same as the clearings on the map. But there is also a fourth suit in the cards, the birds, and these are counted as wild if you ever need to spend a specific suit of card. Now, I find it kind of obvious, but they do make a good point of mentioning it in the rulebook. If you're ever asked to spend a bird suited card, the other three suits are no substitute. You have to spend a bird card. Now, cards provide two different uses. You can, of course, spend them for the suit, or you can spend them to activate the lower ability. Some, like this one here, are crafting, as I mentioned before, but there are others that you can play for an ability, or, of course, victory, as I showed off. But the way that you activate these guys is, I think, universal to all players. You have to first take a crafting action, and then you would need to activate one of your faction's crafting pieces in each of the clearings as shown on the card. The marquise, they use their workshops. The eyrie use their roosts. The alliance, they use something called sympathy, which is specific to them. And you'll note that this one is circle, and as such does not need to be placed in one of the building slots. Now, things are a little different for the vagabond. He'll craft using his hammers, but we'll go through specifically what that means when we get to his description, yeah? Now, there are two final actions that players can take that are universal across all of the different powers, and they're both pretty obvious. The first is movement. Now, despite movement being a fairly obvious concept, there are just a couple of rules that you need to remember. The first of which, a player must rule the clearing that they are moving from, or they must rule the clearing they are moving to. Now, ruling is an easy one. If a player has more power in a location, they rule it. Generally, each warrior a player has in a clearing counts for 1 power, and also each structure. So in this case, the eyrie would not be able to move out of this location into this one because A, they don't rule this clearing, and B, they don't own the clearing that they are moving to. The only acceptable movement option for the eyrie would be if they ruled the clearing over to the left here. The final of the universal actions is the battle action, and this is essentially your combat action, the way that you can take out other players' warriors and earn control of the clearings scattered across the map. Attacking is as simple as rolling 2 dice, and these are 12-sided dice with 0s, 1s, 2s, and 3s, and I believe there's equal number of all facings, yes. You simply roll the dice. Snake eyes. You simply roll the dice, and in examples you need to roll numbers. Perfect. And the attacking player would take the high number. So let's say the attacking player was the marquis here, and the defending player takes the low number. Battle takes place simultaneously, dealing a number of hits equal to the facing on the dice. So here, the marquis rolled a 3, which allows them to deal at most 3 hits to their opponent. However, this is limited by the number of warriors they have with them in the clearing. So in this case, we have 2 marquis warriors. They rolled a 3. They can only deal 2 hits. The eyrie here rolled a 2, and because they had 3 warriors in the clearing, they can deal up to 3. They rolled the 2, so they take away 2 warriors. Now, there are ways that you can deal more hits than the dice, and on top of that, there are ways to prevent players from dealing their full amount of damage. So, for example, if the defender were to play an ambush card, they would be able to take out 2 of the attacking force before they even get a chance to roll. Lucky for the attacker though, they are able to counter the defensive ambush by playing an ambush card of their own. If they do so, none of the ambush effects go off, and combat is resolved as normal. Now, in the case that the attacker rolls more hits than necessary to take out the defending warrior, their hits will actually spill out over into the structures. In this case, the marquis deal 3 hits. The first hit has to be the warriors, and as soon as there are no warriors left, the remaining hits can be dealt out amongst the remaining tokens. In this case, the eyrie's roost would be destroyed, and actually this would grant the marquis a victory point. Something I totally failed to mention, if you ever take out an opponent's building, that's another way to score victory points. Alright, so that is it for the basics of Root, and honestly, to me, that would be game enough, probably. There are plenty of strategic decisions to make with those mechanics alone. But Root being a Leader Games publication and a Cole Whirly game at that, there is so much more depth to be explored. So the Marquis de Cat, they get to go first every game they play. In fact, the turn order will reflect the order at which I will explain the factions. Now these guys, they represent the industry of Root. They want to place sawmills and workshops and recruiting facilities so that they can expand, exploit, and exterminate. It's like a 3X game. That 4th X, Explore, well, that's for the Vagabond. But these guys are very much in it. Now, one of my favorite things about Root is that pretty much everything you need to know about playing the game is contained on your player boards. And I think this is always such a nice touch for game design. We have a short little blurb here, we have a couple of specific player powers, and a spot to place crafted items. And you know this because, well, that's what it says on the board. Down here, we have the turn structure, and then we have any specific player tokens that need to be kept in mind throughout the game. Now that's pretty specific to everybody, so let's dive into the Marquis. You have conquered the forest, now you must build a kingdom worthy of your name. They have a very important structure known as the Keep, and during setup this has to be placed in one of the 4 corners of the board. This token signifies that the Marquis are the only players allowed to enter this clearing. Their next ability, Field Hospitals, allows the Marquis warriors to respawn during combat. If one of their warriors is lost in battle, the player may discard a card of a matching suit to have the defeated warrior respawn at the keep. With both of these things in mind, the Marquis player begins their turn. The turn structure in Root is the same for every player. We have the birdsong, the daylight, and the evening. The catch here is that the actions available within each section, they are completely different player to player. For the marquis, they only have one action during birdsong, and that is to place one wood at each of their sawmills. At the beginning of the game, the marquis only have one sawmill, so that's just one wood to play around with. Moving into the daylight phase, we have two sections. The first is to craft any items using their workshops. Now, at the beginning of the game, the marquis only has one workshop, but these are very important to build. In this case, the marquis have placed their workshop down during setup in one of the rabbit-suited clearings. This means that they would be able to build the travel gear, which they have in hand. This involves activating the rabbit's clearing, which there's nothing to actually do there, just you can't use it over multiple items. And then you gain the bonuses. In this case, we get to take a boot and we get to gain one victory point. Firstly, we grab a boot token from the available items and we place it in our crafted items space on our player board. Now this item has no use to us as a player, but it may help us build relations with the vagabond if he chooses to take it. More on that later though. So we gain the boot and then we gain a victory point and then we discard the card. There we go. And off to a good start. The second part of the daylight phase allows the marquee player to take up to 3 actions plus 1 additional action per bird card that we spend. In this case, we only have 2 cards left and they are both mouse suited, so we're only going to be taking 3 actions. Our choices are to battle, like I showed you before, to march, which involves us taking 2 moves, recruit, and this is the only one of the actions that is limited to once per turn. We may place 1 warrior at each of our recruiters. The 4th action is to build, and this will cost us wood that we've placed onto the board. Let's do this as our first action. The marquee have a lovely number of buildings available to them. We've got the sawmills at the top, which as you've seen produce wood. We have the workshops, which we can use to craft items. And then we have the recruiters, which will produce more of our warriors. Now I'm thinking we'll build a sawmill so that we may improve our production over the course of the game. So as you can see here, this will cost us 1 wood, and we need to have wood connected to the location that we're going to build. I'll show you what this means. Now our wood is left just where we produced it in the top left-hand side of the board here. Now at the beginning of the game, this location is connected to every single other location on the board, except for the opposite corner, which belongs to the eyrie. Now there aren't too many limitations for building, we just have to make sure that we can fit the structure in the clearing we want to build. So over at this clearing, we're unable to place any more structures in there because this ruin token hasn't been removed. So up the top here is a good spot for us. We could, of course, place our structure, far away from our keep. We just need to make sure we can trace an unbroken line through any number of clearings we rule. So in this case, our wood is up the top here. We can first take it down to the rabbit clearing, down to the fox clearing, and then bang, it lands in the mouse clearing and the structure is built. Now obviously you don't actually have to move this token. As long as you can trace the line, it is good, but it does help show how hard these cats work when they're building their structures. On top of placing the sawmill, we actually gain 1 extra victory point, and bang, 2 points. Now the final action available to us is the overwork action, which allows us to produce more wood for our use. Basically we spend a card and then place a wood at a sawmill matching the suit of the card that we discarded. So in this case we've only got 2 mouse suits available to us, and the sawmill we just built is in a mouse clearing, so let's do that. I'm going to spend the investments card, matching our mouse clearing here, and I'm going to place a wood. Remembering, of course, it doesn't have to be placed in a structure location. For our final action, we're going to build in the top right corner of the board. We're going to spend the wood that we just created, placing a recruiter. Grab that token and another +1 for victory points. That is a good start. The last step for the marquee is in the evening phase. We draw 1 card plus an additional card per additional card marker that's showing on our board. We've only built 2 structures. As you can see here, there are no additional cards showing, so just a new card. And we get armorers. Alright, we're sitting safe with 2 cards in our hand. We would have to discard down, but that is it. So next up we have the eyrie. Let's go see what they're all about. Alright, next up we have the eyrie dynasties. They, like the marquis, have 2 unique rules. Lords of the forest. You rule any clearings where you are tied in presence. Usually, if 2 players have the same amount of presence in a clearing, well, it's counted as not being ruled for movement and other purposes. And the eyrie, they break those ties just by being themselves. And this power alone makes them a force to be reckoned with. But as this is such a strong ability, and the way that they play can lead them to become quite powerful, they do have a setback rule. Disdain for trade. When crafting items, you score only 1 victory point. Now, before we get into their turn structure, let's talk about what makes these guys so unique. You see, the eyrie at the beginning of the game have to choose a leader, and their leader will be with them until the moment that they cannot achieve what they set out to do so. So the game recommends starting with the despot eyrie leader. And when we place this card, we're instructed to put a vizier at his move and build locations. Now this will make more sense in just a moment, but let's do as the card says. Having the despot leader active, if you remove at least 1 enemy building or token in battle, score 1 point. Alright, so on beginning his turn we enter the bird song. If your hand is empty, draw 1 card. We're starting with 3 cards at the beginning of the game. Our second step in bird song is to add 1 or 2 cards to the decree. 1 card added may be a bird. Now the decree is kind of an action programming system that the eyrie must follow every turn. When they hit the daylight phase, they're going to move through from left to right and resolve an action for every card they have placed in each of the 4 different types of decree. If they had a card in recruit, for example, they would have to recruit 1 of their warriors in a mouse clearing, in this case. If they're able to resolve all cards there, they move to the next one. Move. Here, they must move warriors from a matching clearing. Now, in the case of having a bird card in the decree section, this counts, of course, as a wild. So that means in this setup, the eyrie are able to move warriors from any location. The next one here is battle. If they have a card in the battle decree, they must enter a combat in a clearing matching the suit of the card. Finally, we have the build. With a card in this spot, we must build a roost in a clearing that doesn't already have a roost. So, with this beginning setup, it's easy to see that our faction here has an expansion and building focus about it. Alright, so let's go ahead and carry this little phase out. Add 1 or 2 cards to the degree, only 1 card may be a bird. Well, I certainly like the prospect of recruiting, so let's begin by placing a bird card. Alright, let's leave it there until we know a little bit more about our board position after this round. We'll move to the 3rd part of the bird song. If you have no roosts, place a roost and 3 warriors in the clearing with the fewest warriors. So this just ensures we always have a presence, we always have a base of operation for our decrees to be enacted. Next we move into the daylight phase and we may craft using roosts. Now currently we've only got a roost in our starting location, which is a rabbit clearing. Unfortunately though, both the cards we have in hand, they require foxes or mice. So there'll be no crafting this round. The second part of the daylight phase for us is to resolve the decree from left to right. So let's go ahead and do that. First we recruit, placing 1 of our warriors, in this case, in any clearing where we have a roost. Alright, let's build up some numbers in there. Next we move. Now we can see here that the marquis are on the offensive. They've placed a sawmill, so let's respond to that by moving some of our forces into that clearing. Let's push 4 of our warriors right up in there. And hopefully soon we can bring a battle to this region and clear it out of these pesky cats. Now we currently have no cards in battle. This means we can't actually battle even if we wanted to. So we move on to the build phase, and luckily for us, we do have a free space in the clearing, so we're going to grab 1 of our roosts, the leftmost actually, off the playmat, and then we're going to place it in the last available building spot in the clearing. Now we move into the evening phase. We score victory points of the rightmost empty space in the roosts track. As you can see here, we've placed one, so we gain 1 victory point. Nice. All right, making our way up the track, albeit a little bit slower than the marquee. Then we draw a card plus 1 card per extra card marker showing, and we discard down to 5. All the standards here. And we get another bird card. This one is crossbow. Nice. Now before we go on, it's worth having a quick look at the other leaders. So here with Despot, they have this little extra bonus here. If you remove at least 1 enemy building or token in battle, score 1 point. So that's another way we can gain victory points. The Commander Eyrie Lever will start with Viziers in move and battle. As an attacker in battle, you deal an extra hit. Super powerful. The next one, we have Charismatic. We have a Vizier in recruit and battle. You place 2 warriors, not 1, each time you recruit. Very good. And then finally we have our little builder. We place a Vizier in recruit and move, and we may ignore the disdain for trade when you craft, which means we gain the full amount of victory points for any crafted items. Now I hear you asking, what happens if we're unable to complete a decree from start to finish? Well, in that case, the eyrie enter turmoil, and we have 4 steps which are nicely spelled out on our player boards here. Firstly, we are humiliated. We lose 1 victory point per bird card, including the Viziers placed on the decree. So as you can see, by placing that wild card in the recruit spot, I've just increased my risk in running the decree. The second step is to purge, and we must discard all decree cards except Viziers. Third, we flip the leader card face down and choose a new one, reassigning Viziers, and then we rest. Immediately end the daylight phase and go to evening. So yeah, so that is it for the eyrie dynasties. Alright, next up we have the Woodland Alliance, and you'd be forgiven for thinking I hadn't actually considered these guys during setup because they actually have no pieces on the board at the moment. But that is exactly right, because the Alliance, they represent the oppressed residents of the forest, the foxes, the mice, the rabbits, everyone who doesn't quite fit into another faction. Now they have 2 unique rules. Outrage, when a player removes or moves into a space containing one of the Alliance's sympathy tokens, they have to give the Alliance one of the cards matching the suit of the location. So let's say we're in the fox clearing over here and the marquee moved in, they would have to give a fox card to the Alliance player. And if they didn't have one in hand, they would have to show them their hand, and then the Alliance player could draw a random card off the top of the deck. Now they also have Guerrilla War, and this ability changes the way that combat works just a little bit. Basically, whenever we roll in combat, if you remember, the attacker always takes the highest of the 2 dice. However, when the Woodland Alliance is in combat, no matter what, if they're the attacker or the defender, they get to choose the highest dice always. And this makes them super hard to deal with when it comes to normal combat. Now, taking a look at the player board, we've got a couple of points of interest here. Over here on the left-hand side, we have a few cards drawn from the deck that are placed face down in the supporters stack. And these cards represent the woodland animals that have joined the Alliance. You'll see how they work in just a sec. Next over here, we have the bases. These represent the 3 main points of power that the Alliance can put into play. And pretty much where they're going to carry out all their main operations. It's ridiculous. These things are super powerful. And finally, down the bottom, we have the sympathy tokens. And these guys have 3 different costs associated with them. The first 3 cost 1 card, the second 3 cost 2 cards, and the final 4 cost 3 cards. And for what I mean about that, we're actually going to talk about the sympathy action, which is the second half of the Woodland Alliance's birdsong phase. We're actually going to go backwards here. So in this second phase, the Alliance may spend their supporter cards to bring these sympathy tokens into play. So for example, if they wanted to play a sympathy token in a rabbit clearing, they would have to, at this point, spend one rabbit card, and they would take the token and place it on the map. Now, when they do this, they kind of have to put them adjacent to other placed tokens, but the very first token that they're able to place, they can put wherever they would like on the map. And as you place more and more tokens, the cost for placing the sympathy will increase. And it's worth noting that underneath each of these tokens is a number of victory points too. This is a great way for the Alliance to gain victory points. Alright, so with that being said, let's talk about the birdsong phase now that we know a little bit more about the sympathy. So the first half of this is called the revolt, and the Alliance may do this any number of times. You have to spend 2 supporters matching a colour of the clearing where we've got a sympathy token in play. So let's take one of these and we'll just have a quick look at what that means. This one here would be a great example. If there were a sympathy token in there and the Alliance player could discard 2 mouse supporters, they would be able to take out all of these enemy tokens, buildings, warriors, and replace it with their base. Now, after the base is in play, the next part of the revolt phase is first to place a number of warriors in that clearing, matching the number of clearings that match the suit. So if I had sympathy in, let's say, 3 mouse clearings, I would be able to place 3 warriors in this clearing. Then, after all that, we would place one of our warriors in the officers box, and this allows us to carry out military operations during the evening phase. Alright, so that's the revolt section of things. Let me just grab all my bases back. Suffice to say, you can't do this in the opening round of the game. So we'll move to the spread sympathy section, and we may do this any number of times, spend the number of supporters listed on the sympathy track, and we can place a sympathy in a matching clearing. So remembering that the sympathy tokens cause outrage, I'm going to try and place this in a high traffic location. I'm thinking the rabbit clearing in the center of the board. So I'm going to discard a visit to friends, and then I'm going to place my sympathy token in that region. Let's keep going. I also have a mouse card, and I'm going to go ahead and discard that to place a second sympathy in a mouse location on the board, but remembering that this one has to be adjacent to any previously placed sympathy token. So I'm going to go up here in the corner. Now, something to keep in mind when you place a sympathy. If you want to place your sympathy in a location like this one down here that has at least 3 warriors of another player, this is actually going to cost you an additional supporter of that color. So it can be costly to invest in these locations because, well, obviously it's so powerful if you can cause a revolt there. Back to the player board, and we can see we've uncovered 2 +1 victory points. So I'm going to go ahead and grab them now. Here we go. 1, 2, nice. All right, let's move into the daylight phase, and the first thing that we're able to do here is craft. Now, I'll take a look at my hand of cards, remembering these are separate from my supporters. So over here, I've just picked up another 3. I have a mouse who can craft me the root tea, which is very nice. We have brutal tactics, which can give me an ongoing ability, but I would need foxes to do this, and then a fox card that also gives me a rat ability. Let's go ahead and craft this root tea so we can begin working on our relationship with the vagabond. To craft, we use clearings that contain our sympathy. Here we can see that last place sympathy is in a mouse location, so I'm going to go ahead and craft. In doing so, I gain a T and 2 victory points, and I discard the card. T and victory points. Now, it's worth noting that we can do these daylight actions any number of times. We're not limited, well, I guess we're only limited to our cards. The next thing we can do is mobilize, which is to add a card from our hand to the supporters stack. So I've got these 2 cards left that I can't quite craft with yet, and I think they would be a perfect addition to our supporters, so I'm going to drop them in there, and then I can train, spending a card from my hand, matching a built base to place a warrior in the officers box over here. Obviously, I have no bases built, so I'm just going to move on forward into the evening phase. Now, in the evening phase, we get to use our military operations, and the number of military ops that we can do is limited by the number of officers we have in our officers box. Obviously, at the beginning of the game, with no bases built, I can't play anything, but I will explain what they are. First is movement. Easy, we've done this plenty of times. Battle, again, classic. The next one is recruit. We can place a warrior at a base. And then the last one is to organize, where we would remove a warrior from a clearing and replace him with a sympathy. The last part of the evening phase is to draw a card, plus 1 per extra card icon showing, and then we discard down to 5. Boom, on to the vagabond. Now the vagabond is arguably one of the biggest highlights of this game. He is just a single unit force and he roams the map doing pretty much whatever he wants to. During setup, the vagabond player gets to choose which of the different vagabonds they're going to play as. We have the ranger, who's very good at repairing, the tinker, who can gain cards from the discard pile, and the thief, who can steal cards from opponents. And not only do they have special abilities, but depending on which particular vagabond you start with, they start with a different set of items. Yes, items! We finally get to see how these guys work. Now, in the introductory game, you're going to start as the thief. So in doing so, you're going to start off with a pair of boots, a torch, a tea, which is actually placed in its section in the birdsong, and a little sword. Now, the vagabond has a couple of rules associated with him. He's nimble, he can move regardless of who rules a particular clearing. So remember where you have to either rule the clearing that you're leaving or rule the clearing that you're moving to. He gets to ignore that, and he's the lone warrior. His pawn is not considered a warrior and cannot be removed from the map. Now this doesn't mean that he can't be attacked, but I'll show you about that in a sec. So we'll just quickly go over his board there, beginning with his relationships section, and this tracks how friendly he is with the other players in the game. Basically, if he helps a particular faction enough, they will move up a notch and he will gain victory points based on the level they achieve. If we go all the way to the end, he's considered allied with the faction, and then anytime he aids that faction, he gains 2 victory points. Now that's all well and good, but like I said, the vagabond can do pretty much whatever he wants. And this might include, I don't know, falling into combat with one of the factions. If he does so, that faction moves directly off the tracker and into the hostile box here. And there is no coming back from that. No matter how friendly the vagabond is to a faction in the hostile box, they can never achieve the alliance. The good news is, though, the vagabond will gain a victory point for every hostile piece that he removes off the board, which is fantastic. All right. Now, down here, we have his satchel, and this is split up into 2 sections. We have the items available to him. They have a ready-to-use side, and when you use the item, you flip it over, showing that you can't use it again until it's refreshed. If the thief himself gets damaged, we take one of the items and move it into the damaged box. That item cannot be used until it's repaired and brought back into the satchel. So that's all I'll go through there. Let's begin having a look at his turn phases. The first part is the bird song. And in this phase, we begin by refreshing 3 items plus 2 more items per kettle or per tea token that we have. So in this case, we've got a tea up there. We would be able to refresh 5 items. So we can just do our 3 there, and that is done. This allows the vagabond to continue using the items throughout the game. Now there are 2 main ways that the vagabond will actually use these items. He can use them in the daylight phase to enact certain abilities, or he can use them to complete quests. During setup and every moment after that, the vagabond will have 3 quest cards available to him. Now, as you can see, quest cards have a suit as well. They have a cost, and they offer rewards. So to fend off a bear, the vagabond has to be in a mouse clearing. He has to expend his torch and a crossbow, and then as a reward he may draw 2 new cards, just normal ones from the deck, or he can gain 1 victory point per matching quest card that's been completed. So if this was the first mouse quest that he's completed, he's going to gain 1. Or let's say he'd previously completed guard duty on an earlier turn, he would now gain 1 plus 1, 2 points. As soon as the vagabond plays a quest card for its rewards, he draws another one, always having access to 3. During the second part of the birdsong, the vagabond is able to slip into a clearing or a forest at no cost. So as you'll note here, the vagabond begins the game in a forest, so during his first birdsong he may move out of that into another clearing so that it's a little easier for him to move around. So into the daylight phase, this is where we get to use our gained items to enact our abilities. So by utilizing one of our boots, we're able to move the vagabond into a clearing, but not into a forest. If we flip over his sword, we battle, and it's the number of swords he has in his possession that represents the amount of strength he has. So when attacking and rolling the dice, he can take out a number of warriors up to the number of swords he has in his possession. And as I said before, the vagabond himself cannot be removed from... We move one of his items into the damage section. Move one of his items into the damage section. We can flip over a torch to take an item from a ruin in the clearing, and we score a victory point. So let's play a little bit here. We flip over our boot to move from the forest into the fox clearing down here, and then we'll flip over our torch so we can explore the ruin. Exploring the ruin is a great idea. Not only does it give us the item hidden within, but it removes the ruin token, allowing other players to build there. In this case, with the marquis ruling this location, they might offer some sort of thanks, perhaps by crafting an item. We'll see how that works in just a sec. Our next one is aid. Our next action is aid, and we can use any of our items to activate this, and when doing so, we would give a card matching the clearing that we're in to a player there. So we've got a fox card in hand. We could give that to the marquis player. Why would we do that, I hear you ask? Well, we may take an item from them as payment. So let's do that. We'll pay the marquis a fox card, and we'll take from them a pair of boots they crafted earlier. This item would now drop into our satchel. Next, we could expend items to complete a quest. Unfortunately, though, we don't have the required items for any of our quests here, so we'll skip that one. If we had the crossbow, we could strike, removing a piece in the clearing. Warriors first, so that's a pretty powerful one. Or we could grab a hammer and repair some of our broken items and all that sort of stuff. After we're finished with our actions during the day, we move into the evening phase. First, we have an evening's rest. If in a forest, we may repair all items. Then we would draw one card plus an extra card per coin stack that we've collected. Then we'd have to discard down to 5 as usual. Finally, we would remove items from our satchel down to a total of 6. We can only carry 6 items in here, but if we happen to have bags, we would be able to hold 2 more for each bag. Whew, there is a lot there. Certainly, this is an absolute monster of a game, and even with those simple rules that make each faction so unique, you can have such a crazy, strategic, interesting, adventurous time playing with this. In fact, I'm going to stop talking about this game now. I'm going to pack this up, and then I'll fill you in on my thoughts of the game.
Oh man, am I having a lot of fun with Root. This is just such a great evolution from the Vast thing. I know it's completely different designers and all that stuff, but this is the perfect next step for leader games. Something that bridges the gap between, you know, your tabletop Euro into more of a war game, because war games, they offer such a unique take on tabletop gaming that you just can't get without taking it to the map and going head to head with a couple of players. The main theme here is certainly not cooperation. You're going to be taking on your enemies with absolute vengeance. Of course, unless you are the vagabond, because they have such a strange role to play in this game. They do whatever they want. They help whoever they want. They are essentially the balancing factor in this game. If they see someone coming out leading towards the top, the vagabond are there to take them down. Now, of course, they're not always going to be in play. It's not always going to be that you're hitting the table with 4 players playing each of the factions. And you know what? That is okay. All the different combinations that you can play this game with, they offer a unique look at the basic gameplay that this thing has brought to the table. Marquis versus the eyrie. The Marquis are the titans of engine building, but the eyrie, they're rewarded by perfect programming and perfect planning. It's just such an entertaining thing to watch. The Woodland Alliance being the absolute tricksters of the game and your worst nightmare once they get a foothold. You are going to be losing cards to their sympathy the whole game once they're in there, and then when you least expect it or when you least hope, they are going to explode, put one of their bases on the map and take away everything that you have built. This game is vicious, except for the vagabond. He's lovely. Let's talk component quality, because it's a beautiful game. The art style, I guess it's a kind of love or hate it style of art. It's kind of cartoony, and it could lead you to believe that this is not quite as serious a game as it is. But once, of course, you get into it, into the rules explanation, man, you've got another thing coming, right? And it sort of helps soften that up. I'm sure this could have been just a generic war, I say generic war game, this could have been like a World War II war game, easy as. But isn't it wonderful that it's not? Isn't it wonderful that we have this beautiful woodland art that brings you into this whole world that gives each and every faction a meaning behind every turn? They each have something to achieve, and I absolutely implore you to read the blurbs on these guys. Read and get a feel for your characters, your factions every time you play, because it really helps focus you into the game that you're about to play, and it helps you connect and build rivalries with those on the board, and that is just such a beautiful thing, right? There are games out there where you'll sit across the table from someone and you could play not knowing they were there. Your actions don't have weight, they don't have consequence. Yes, you're messing with their game, but why? I talked in my hate video about world building, and this has world building built into the cards, built into the artwork. It absolutely elevates this game into a storytelling experience. Man, I'm getting wanky right now. Look, I was playing this game at the same time I was reviewing Hate, and they're completely different games, but because they share a tactical feel, it kind of broke Hate for me, right? What I thought was a wonderful, fun dice chucker romp with a bit of strategy, I no longer want to play that if I have the opportunity to play Root instead. I know they're different games, but this one scratches that strategic itch that I would otherwise be looking for in Hate, or I don't know, it's so ruined so many games for me. It's so good. That's my opinion though. So, we were talking about components before I went off the rail, right? Yeah. Components are lovely. The wooden pieces are full of character, the board is thick, the cards, the art on the cards, I'm obviously a big fan of the art, but they really do help set the scene for the game. Even the fact that they've given us 12-sided dice. I'm not sure how that changes the stats, the chance of rolling a number, but it's just nice to actually roll something spherical. And let's talk gameplay, because I want to lead in by saying how simple combat is, but how absolutely rewarding it is in the planning. Yes, it's simple to resolve, but man, it is hard to create that perfect situation. This game offers challenge. Not only that you have to figure out how your faction fits in with everyone else, but you've got to overcome your faction's weaknesses to really shine a light on their strengths, because trust me, every faction can be broken by wrong decisions. If you expand in the wrong places, Eyrie especially, they are a root expert faction, alright? You gotta know exactly what you're getting into with those guys. I would not wish that on a beginning player ever. The marquise, they are probably a lot more straightforward, but as soon as their supply lines are broken, they come crumbling down and they go into damage control, rallying their cats, trying to get those key points of interest back. Like I said, the Woodland Alliance, they're so sneaky, and it's almost as though they're not on the map until bang, they're all over the map. They are wrecking your plans. Of course, if you've placed one of their bases and that base gets destroyed, you are in a really tough spot. It is so important to really protect those things, to ensure that you can use those military actions at the end of the day, but most of all, so you can create your very own foothold in this game, taking it away from the other factions. Now, the big reason that I didn't do a playthrough for this game, just a couple of rounds or something, is it really relies on players kind of knowing what they're doing and having the hidden information between players, what their goals are, what their plans are. It's hard to mimic, and I tried. It's hard to mimic this in a playthrough. Now, I'm not sure how the Riverfolk expansion's solo mode changes this. I will be looking forward to playing that once I get my hands on it, but man, it really does rely on a good table of players. Obviously, 4 is where it shines, but if you can't get that, you're still going to have an interesting, what I would call a practice run for the full game where everyone is at the table. Now, that might be a detrimental factor. I know a lot of people out there like to play with just 2, just 3. They want to come home, they want to play a board game with their partner, with their kids. You might not be able to fill up the table all the time. And I don't think it's something that should stop you from picking this game up if you don't have those players. But it is something to be wary of, that you do want to play this with all the players to get the full experience. Let's talk about the who's going to like this and who's not going to like this, because there are a few things that fall into each category for me. The first thing that I'll talk about is the teaching. So we'll start with those that won't get into this game. And one of the biggest drawbacks, I believe, is in the teaching of the game. It is quite simple once you know the basics, and those basics are easy to apply to the factions if you know what the factions do. But that first time you play with the table full of players, you're going to explain the basics just as I did. And then you're going to sit down, have a one-on-one with each of the other players to say, this is your role. And it's important that the other players listen in and they hear what the other factions are trying to achieve so they can counter it. But this can be hard with certain groups of people. Now, I think to combat this, the first game you play with any number of new players should be to carry out the instructions given in the demonstration game in the rulebook, because this does a great job of explaining all the different basic rules and showcasing, highlighting a little bit all the factions' unique points. And I think your game should continue from that point onwards. You get your 2 terms in and then you continue the game for real. But honestly, I found that it still has to be a teaching game. You still have to play a vocal role as the sort of, it's not as game master, but you do have to assist when called upon, because this game can fall to pieces if there is a straggler. Because man, once you slow down, it's very hard to find a catch-up mechanism outside of a very generous vagabond, seriously. Yes, this is a weighty game. I wouldn't put it as high as something like Feudum, where there is just a ton of stuff to remember, because at the end of the day, all the rules specific to your factions are contained on those player boards. But there is a lot to think about as you play. Your decisions early game will affect the way the rest of the game goes. Some people might not like the art, and I honestly don't care for that as a complaint, because there is so much great game behind this art that if that's your drawback, get stuffed. Play the game. You will love it anyway, I promise. And that's probably all I've got for the people not liking it, because there is honestly so much to praise in this game. It's captured my imagination, or probably more than any other game that I've got floating around in recent times. It is captivating, and while behind the wonderful stories that are created, there is a meaty Eurogame with the cogs turning and the numbers crunching. But you know what? When I play this game, I completely miss all the numbers. I completely miss the cogs because I'm focusing on my worded goals. As the marquis, I need to build my engine. As the eyrie, I need to plan the actions of my dynasty. I need to see into the future and keep my people happy. As the alliance, I am here to cause as much chaos as I can. And as the vagabond, I'm just here to mess with you all. And the fact that I can say this about what is probably a heavy Euro war game is amazing. What other games can you say do that? I can name a few. because that's the sort of game that I like. But it's a rare thing still, I would have to say. If you've played leader game stuff before, Vast the Crystal Caverns and the Mansion one that's on its way, you know what you're in for here. You're in for a wildly intriguing game. This style of gameplay, which I attribute to them, I think I could be wrong in saying that, but the leader game style of gameplay is just such a wonderful thing to experience. Sure, this might not be the game to purchase for everybody, but I honestly think it is the game to play for everyone who has any interest in this hobby at all. And as a side note, when I think about this game, this stupid cheesy grin comes into play. Isn't that cool? I don't know. Alright, that's enough for me rambling along there, guys. I hope you've been able to see what Root is all about, and I hope that it's sort of captured your interest so that you can go out there and try and find a copy to play. And I believe they've got a Kickstarter coming up for their second expansion. This is going to introduce a new deck to run through. It's going to introduce new factions to play, and honestly, just on the deck thing, this is going to completely change the way this game works, even without the new factions. I'll do my best to put up a link in the description once that hits. But yeah, guys and gals, that is it for us today. So if you've enjoyed the video, make sure you like, comment, subscribe. Do all those things that you guys can do to help this channel grow. We're sitting at about 850 subs to go, 150 more, and we hit the so out of reach 1,000 that I never thought we'd get this close, but how cool is this? We're here together. Let's keep it rolling. All right, guys, that's it. I'll catch you on the flip side. As always, my name's Michael. This is Bits Aboard. We'll catch you next time.